Alright, what's up y'all? Welcome back to an Unusual Force themed video. If the title of the video didn't already reveal what I'll be covering today, it's Unusual Force 5. If this is your first time hearing about Unusual Force 5, and throughout the video you grow any interest towards the game, know that I'll be leaving the Discord link to the game in the description. By the way, for this video I'll be doing a sort of overview / showcase of what's been made so far across multiple playtests, along with explaining basics and whatnot, but keep in mind that this is not necessarily a guide. So if I miss something, just know that in the future I'll probably make a more detailed video. But anyway, transition cue here. Unusual Force 5 Soul Ascension is a PvP game with inspiration from the Yakuza series. If you aren't familiar with the Yakuza series, then I think it should be easier to follow along if I just say they're the series that created John Yakuza and the Dame Dane meme. But jokes aside, if you want to understand any references and whatnot, or just get into the series in general, I'd personally recommend playing any of the games in the series or watching someone's playthrough. If you ask me for my very biased take, I would definitely start with Yakuza 0. Anyway, to get back into the topic, as I mentioned before, the game's basic premise is built around PvP and the Yakuza series. To be more specific, the game revolves around the concepts of fighting styles, which you have a big variety to pick from inside the fighting style shop. Each fighting style encourages different strategies and playstyles, though I will not deny that some styles can play similar to others, if not the same. And while I do want to quickly cover every style, I actually haven't managed to play with all of them yet, so instead, I'll quickly mention the ones I did get to use while noting some stuff about them. So to start off, we have Freelancer is one of 4 starter styles in Unusual Force 5, at least since the recording of this video. The fighting style's whole gimmick is that it's a all-rounder type of fighting style that specializes in doing short combos but relatively good damage. The notable damage comes from some skills like Tenacious Fist and Headbutt Barrage, which do big damage against players who aren't expecting them, yet they can also be easily avoided if you're paying attention. Freelancer also has 2 other skills alongside its heat action, but I will not be going into depth about them in this video. Possibly in the future I'll make a Freelancer showcase, so don't worry about that. Fighter is the style you spawn in with when playing the game for the first time. This basically means that it also counts as one of the starter styles, and it happens to act like an opposite to the Freelancer style. You can mostly see this with its skills and combo routes. For example, unlike Freelancer, Fighter has a simple counter skill and flying knee attack that can be charged up to perform juggle combos. Fighter is also able to juggle with one of its finishers if you have enough meter for it. Meanwhile, Freelancer is only able to extend its M1 combo with a specific finisher if you have enough heat for it. So yeah, from the few examples I provided, you should see how they potentially act as opposites. If you didn't like Freelancer, then it's possible you might stick to Fighter or go back to it. Ravager is another style in the starter styles category section. Though unlike Fighter and Freelancer, this style's focus is all about being tanky and slow, yet in exchange you basically hit like a truck. In addition to that, Ravager's other gimmick revolves around playing with hyper armor. So you'll have charged finishers, and some of your skills will let you power through damage with hyper armor as well. Unless you're hit with a grab, of course, though. Because for some reason, grabs just bypass everything in this game, except for iframes. Though, speaking of grabs, Ravager has a grab of its own. Not to mention, it also has a revenge counter, or block counter if you'd like to call it that, to avoid too much pressure, in case you were worried that you're too slow or you get hit too much. So, if what I explained about the style interests you, then maybe you should definitely give Ravager a chance whenever the game opens. Assassin is one of the more advanced styles. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to use this style to constantly pressure other players while also predicting what they'll do. You don't deal too much damage, but you don't deal very little either, so that's where you come in keeping up the pressure. Also, I had no idea what I was doing with the style for a lot of the clips you're seeing in the background, so while I did get to use the skills, I would not be able to give you confident advice as to how to use them. Especially since one of them is just a regular kick, from the looks of it, and the other one is a gut punch you can charge up. Though, I can't say that the gut punch skill is a pretty good skill for baiting, since if you land it, you get yourself a free M1 combo, so you do good damage. And it might potentially guard break, but I didn't get to check that, so sorry. But if there's a thing I did know and enjoy about this style, it was definitely its counter heat action being the fucking neck snap that has never killed anyone in the Yakuza series. And that was a quick summary of the fighting styles I got to try out. If it seemed a little confusing to follow, it might have been because I haven't explained any mechanics yet. But I'm literally gonna do that right now, so yeah. So here's a quick disclaimer. The GUI has changed while I was working on this video, so I'll switch between the new one and the old one purely to explain a few things, though keep in mind that for the most part, you'll be seeing the old one, but I am gonna show the new GUI, so do excuse me on that part, but yeah, my bad. To start things off, let's talk about the main combat GUI, which is these icons you should be seeing on screen. This orange bar right here is your health bar, and that's it really, to be honest. Make sure it doesn't go all the way down, or you die. Simple enough. This blue bar you see up here is your soul level, or just general level. Every time you beat someone, you get a certain amount of XP. Though, what are these levels for, you might be asking? Well, it's for unlocking stuff like new styles, essences, emotes, battle music, and potentially a thing or two I might have forgotten to mention. There's also a yen currency in the game, which is connected to your soul level because you'll be using it to buy stuff as well. And yeah, you pretty much just get it by winning 1v1s or by hitting people a lot. This icon here is both your block meter and combo escape meter. It drains if you block attacks, get guard broken, or if you get the key prompt to escape a type of stun applied to you. Usually, if you're stunned against a wall or juggled, you can use half of your meter to, evade out of that. Though, be mindful that this evasion meter has no connection to the quicksteps you've probably been seeing on screen. Those can be done as long as you haven't used all of them in one setting. But take into consideration that every style has a different amount of quicksteps. Your icon here normally doesn't have much usage, but when you join the game for the first time, you should have this weird bar layout, which is your heat bar. Usually after filling up the first bar, some styles allow you to do new stuff, like skill combinations, or just outright unlocking something new that you couldn't do without any heat. Once you get to 2 bars of heat, you get what most people refer to as heat mode, which is this fiery aura your avatar gets upon hitting those 2 bars. You might or might not unlock some new moves at this heat level, but usually it's a good indicator that you're halfway through your max amount of heat that you can have. After filling up the 3rd bar, you get to extreme heat mode. Usually, whatever fiery aura you had previously changes color, so that's your indicator that you've collected 3 heat bars without looking at the bar. This heat level is important since aside from being able to do new things, you get access to something called heat actions, which are essentially your super finishing move that does a lot of damage. I'll go into details about heat actions in a bit, but I just had to bring them up because they basically appear at this level, so. There's also a 4th heat bar, but aside from doing what all 3 previous heat bars did, there's nothing new aside from serving as more storage in case you need to save a meter to do a combo or something like that. Now, I'll mention 2 things before we move on. First thing I'd like to mention is that you can change the color of your heat mode and extreme heat mode by buying essence colors in the essence shop. So if you were confused as to what an essence was, then, there you go. Essences can also change the color of your style icon, XP bar, and if I'm not mistaken, the cooldown bar thing, because that was also a thing that I probably mentioned earlier, but never elaborated on, so there you go. And lastly, you can also change the look of your heat bar in the settings menu. So if you don't like the Judgment inspired heat bar structure, you can go with a more default heat bar structure, which should be inspired by Yakuza 3, 4, or 5, one of those games. Who knows? Unusual Force 5 has different types of stun effects, which, I'm not gonna lie, explaining every single one of them is gonna be a bit of a pain without getting a fucking aneurysm, but here's my brief attempt so that way you can easily recognize them. I hope. First, we have M1 stuns. Usually you'll see this one if you're hit by M1s or if you hit someone with M1s. These are relatively short and only stun long enough for you to land your next M1 or finisher if you don't take too long. So if the other person manages to block your M1 or finisher, then it's likely you took too long and basically you gave them the opening to block your attack. Also, something important to keep in mind is that every time you hit someone with your M1s, they'll be pushed back a certain amount of distance, and you also move forward while attacking. So make sure you're following them while you hit them, since there's a chance they might slip out of your M1 combo if you're not keeping up with them properly. Do however make sure that you're playing at reasonable ping because, some of this stuff can happen if you don't have stable ping. Next up, we have finisher knockbacks. As the name says, this stun usually applies after a regular M1 combo finisher. These grant iframes to whoever's been knocked back, and animation wise you will see them recover very quickly, but if the person that's been stunned isn't paying attention, you could easily just keep pressuring if you time your hits right. Though, this is just kind of a general name and not an official one, because I know for a fact some styles have different finisher effects, and not all of them will do the same thing. And that's pretty much it for this one. And now, to jump into new territory, we have the knockdown effect. There's actually two different knockdown effects, but to start off, I'll first talk about the regular one, in quotation marks, or if you'd like to call it, hard knockdown. So let's get to that real quick. The hard knockdown effect is applied to some finishers and skills and can be identified since sometimes they'll have a sound cue or they'll provide affected players with the chance to evade, which is kind of weird because they're not really evading, but more so they can waste their evasion meter to recover quickly to mix up or something like that. Though something important to note, some attacks, finishers or skills probably, it seems like they're able to hit you if they come out fast enough, so potentially there are some exceptions to hitting knocked players. The second type of knockdown effect is the Writhing knockdown effect. To keep it short, it essentially plays out like the regular knockdown. However, players affected by this type of stun will not immediately get up and instead roll back and forth while holding their face, at least, animation wise. Noticeably, players affected by this type of stun will usually get a blurry filter on their end as shown on screen. Though keep in mind that only some skills do this, while others don't. This type of stun also allows you to land certain attacks that can hit knocked players in this state. Usually some finishers that slam downwards in their animation can hit, or skills that visibly hit the floor will be able to damage players in this stun state. I think a quick example I can give you so you guys understand. There's Freelancer's S1B, which is its running attack, which I didn't mention earlier, but it's a diving attack thing that can hit writhing affected players. And Tiger's down slam finisher can also do that, in theory. Now you might be wondering, what's exactly the difference between these two knockdown effects? Because they technically sound the same and act the same. Well, I guess the only difference is that the writhing effect makes your opponent just linger on the floor longer than the other knockdown effect. So I suppose that means you have more time to strategize or to do something else. Essentially, that's really it, to be honest. And you could also argue that they both have different sound effects because a lot of the skills have a unique sound cue for whenever they hit someone and they apply a certain knockdown effect. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up, we have the Juggle stun effect. If you're familiar with fighting games, then this one should be easy to understand. Essentially, after landing a specific skill or finisher under the right requirements, you'll start a juggle combo. You can visibly see if someone has been put in a juggle combo if their character floats in the air for a few seconds after being hit. And speaking of, make sure to be close as possible when doing juggle combos, since if you miss your hits or take too long, players are very likely to recover. Also, if people escape out of it mid-combo or the moment they're juggled, that's because they have their evasion meter available. You'll have to drain it completely to pull off your full combo, so make sure to drain their block or evasion meter beforehand by guard breaking them or baiting them with juggle starters. And to follow it up, we have a stun that acts similar to juggling, except it's on the ground. This type of stun is a reference to Yakuza wall bounding combos, so I guess we can just call this the bounding stun effect. But like I did say a bit ago, it's essentially just juggling, but you do it against players sliding across the floor. I'm pretty sure it follows the same rules as juggling, though I do think doing combos with this type of stun is a bit hard since players affected move a lot, meaning that you have to be constantly moving to not miss any of your hits, because if you're late by even a second, they'll immediately recover. There's also two other bounding effects that, well, they're in the game and they can be a bit hard to recognize since they seem to be tied to using some styles. For example, there is a bounding effect that has a different animation where you basically roll backwards. And this stun effect is comboable, it's just that not every style can combo off of it because, you know, you roll backwards. And like I probably said, some styles benefit more off of this stun than others. So it's pretty style specific if you're gonna benefit off this one. And the other bounding effect is basically wall bounding. Pretty much if you're knocked into a wall, your character will basically just lay against the wall and you can be comboed against if the other person's style is fast enough to hit you. I'm pretty sure the more you're hit, the faster you'll likely recover, and of course if they miss then you're just gonna recover immediately, but like the previous bounding effects, these are still pretty hard to do proper combos with, I would say, so it's gonna take some practice to really get the hang of them. For the last stun effect that I'll be covering, assuming I didn't forget any others, we have the Agony Strike stun effect. I think that's what it's called in this game at least. The Agony Strike effect is pretty much the quote-unquote safe combo starter or extender stun effect, which can be identified after landing a finisher, skill, or guard break. Finishers and skills will make your screen glow for a brief second, meanwhile, guard breaks will have a sound cue to guide you, but they're not going to have the glow effect. This effect also has a unique stun animation where players affected stumble back and ever so slightly kneel for a brief moment. Though if I'm being honest, this stun effect isn't always a guaranteed combo starter or extender, but the statement purely depends on how slow your fighting style is in actuality. For example, Ravager seems to have a lot of finishers that Agony Strike, yet because of the recovery time, you can't really benefit off a lot of them unless the stunned player is essentially next to you. The more balanced or agile styles probably don't have this issue. I'm mostly just bringing this up since, you know, I use Ravager and that was something that I noticed. Heat actions, as I previously stated, are your super ultimate finishing move that you can only do at your third heat bar. Some styles have grab-like heat actions, others have counter-based heat actions that of course work like any other counter, and there's also the power-up heat mode type that essentially buff the fighting style by giving it new things, or by just outright buffing its stats. This also means that some heat actions are more stationary while others probably fling you forward or around. So figuring out how to land them will vary depending on what they do during windup. There's also, as I like to call them, environmental heat actions, that at the moment only happen against knocked or wall-bounded players. Usually to identify when you can do an environmental heat action, you'll get the key prompt. It might be different for mobile and console if there's console and mobile support, but you will see the button for a second. These, if I'm not mistaken, usually do less damage than your style's like default heat action, but they can serve to finish off players or just to pressure even further. And that's pretty much it for heat actions. Taunting is also in the game, which at first might seem like something toxic to use. However, it actually has its practical uses in battle. Usually if you taunt in front of a player, regardless if they're moving or not, you'll gain heat towards your heat bar. For some styles, this might not be something necessary to use, but for other styles, it could be a game-changing mechanic for a 1v1, especially if you're in front of a knocked opponent. And while that should be all for taunting, there's actually a bit more. Because every time someone taunts you successfully, there's a chance you get one of two effects. One of them is the Rage effect, which is represented by this red fist icon along with your avatar getting a red aura themselves. As you might imagine, if you're enraged, you pretty much do more damage. And as for this other effect, there might be a fear effect, but I'm honestly not sure if that even exists. So there's a chance that it wasn't even a real thing to begin with, but if it is, then I can't really provide what it does, sadly. Perfect blocking or perfect evasion are also in the game. Perfect blocking, if I'm not mistaken, gives you heat and also provides you with a free window to attack immediately, though I'm not too sure about this last part. And perfect evasion also provides you with heat, but instead of doing what perfect blocking does, it will instead reset your quickstep cooldown. There's also these pop-ups that appear throughout a battle, which if I'm not mistaken, act as multipliers towards your final reward or provide benefits similar to perfect blocking or evasion. The reason I'm bringing these up now is because every style has their own unique set of pop-ups that are linked to doing certain things, like for example, ending fights with a specific skill or heat action. This could potentially mean that there are other pop-ups that have yet to be discovered or are harder to obtain, since I can imagine I probably missed getting those hard ones. Though if they aren't any and this is just rambling of mine, so you know I'm basically doing like a conspiracy theory, I guess these do work as good motivators to get good at the game. For the final mechanic I'll be talking about, let's bring up the shift lock and running features. At base value, you might think they sound pretty basic and require little to no explanation. However, they are a bit complex in this game if you get easily confused like me, especially if you're playing on PC, at least, you know, during combat. There's 3 vital buttons on your keyboard that allow you to mess with your current camera type. The first 2 are the Alt key and Control key on your keyboard. Hitting either button will allow you to turn on shift lock or to turn it off. Where it can get confusing is when you switch from shift lock to running and vice versa. To run, you need to have your style out and then press shift. This will put you in a free cam state, which will essentially let you run. If you press shift again, it'll put you back in your previous camera mode. So essentially, make sure not to hit alt or control while running, even if it seems a little confusing. Just aim for your running attack or whatever strategy you're looking to do while running. Now, to put the combat stuff aside, the game does have some neat aspects that aren't necessarily behind PvPing, such as the in-game menu being your very own phone. The phone allows you to access stuff like settings, some shops, or other features. These other features include your health bar outside of combat, which is in the form of the phone's battery, so if you're low on health, just get a fucking charger, man. There's also some other apps on your phone that you can interact with, like for example, Clash Royale, Jetpack Joyride, and Hill Climb Racing, which play just as intended. The phone also has a Arenas app, which allows you to set up lobbies to fight multiple players at once on an isolated map. It does seem like in the future there will be more maps, but for now there's only one, and you can also only have up to 4 players. Also, playing on Arenas gives you a little cool entrance animation, so that's neat, right? There's other apps on the phone, but at the moment they seem kinda incomplete, like the inventory system, which I assume will have a purpose in a later playtest, or maybe when the game actually ends up releasing.
How to get free Robux. Ho ho.
And, well, I am actually running a little bit short on time. I do have to leave soon, so let's just cut to the criticism section, and I will also bring up some concepts that I probably did not bring up earlier. And well, I don't know, maybe you'll find what I have to say interesting, so let's just get to this segment. First, let's start with a more positive take on what I've been able to gather out of the game so far. Because the footage I got to record was from public playtesting, I do personally think I can't judge the game to its fullest yet, because, you know, it hasn't released yet. But honestly, so far, for what the game is, I do think it's pretty fun, and a general upgrade in comparison to previous Unusual Force games. I think the primary eye-catcher is definitely the visual improvements, so animations, effects, the GUI, and even the addition of a lot of the mechanics I previously explained are definitely pretty good changes. And I don't want to exclude any other features that aren't just PvP. I do think the fact that the game has customization or additions that aren't necessarily based around PvP are just, in general, a great idea, and I honestly would like to see more, aside from getting new styles. That aside, I do think the PvP also feels pretty nice, so I honestly don't really have much to complain about. And it's honestly pretty surprising because as someone that dislikes PvP games, I think I actually can have a lot of fun, especially since, you know, this game has so much to work with when it comes to 1v1s, even if sometimes you think the stuff you get hit with may seem like bullshit. But that aside, I do think from a casual standpoint, the game is pretty nice. Now, there are definitely some things I have issues with, as much as I do like the game. For instance, I do think this version of Unusual Force is definitely one of the hardest to play. The mechanics are a major factor in this, even though I do like them. But the reason I do say this is because, while it is fun that you have a lot of tools to work with, you also have to keep in mind that it's a lot of tools to, you know, remember. The fact that we have so much to work with does make it complex. And I can definitely see this being an issue for new players because there's no tutorial when you join the game. Now, credit where credit is due. I know Volk has been working on adding like little question mark stuff that essentially lists like what each fighting style does, and I think all the styles are gonna get them if they don't already have them, which is good because, you know, that way you don't have to just die a lot and frustrate yourself into figuring out how your fighting style works. But I kind of wish we had a form of tutorial or something that explained other core mechanics like the ones I previously explained, especially considering that I know some people will probably, you know, not check out any Discords or try to find any Google Docs or probably avoid watching videos for God knows what reason. But, you know, it would be nice if the game had a lot more info. Another thing that did catch my attention is that this game has a mechanic where you lose yen upon dying. I'm still a bit unsure as to how this exactly works, because there are times where you do lose yen and there's other times where you don't. My theory so far is that it's either a soul level gap thing, so if you fight someone that's too high of level, maybe don't lose anything, or it might just actually be a random thing. And while this can be a bad thing, in a way it's also a good thing, because while you can lose money from fighting others, you can always make it back, or even make more than what you originally had, since beating someone in a 1v1 potentially lets you steal a fraction of that person's money. And even then, you don't seem to exactly steal that person's amount of money, and sometimes you even make more money than what you should be making, which is a bit weird because I assume people don't carry like large amounts of money in this game, so it's double-sided essentially. Now, to wrap this up, I do have one more thing I like to talk about, and that's the inclusion of other content that isn't PvP. This mostly comes from the fact that I do have some footage from Volk spawning in like NPC thugs that actually have fighting styles, and, you know, they can react, fight, do all this stuff like any other player could. And while they probably were spawned as a joke and we're probably not gonna see them in game, I do think the inclusion of other content that isn't necessarily PvP, as long as it's not like cash grabs and stuff like that, could bring some light. Like, for example, we could just get like a long battle endless mode thing you can access through your phone, maybe through arenas, or maybe NPCs could serve as a rare event to get money. I'm honestly just tossing ideas without really thinking about them, to be honest. And I can fully understand if you guys don't agree, especially if your thing is just PvPing. But if you disagree, that's what the comment section is for, and I'll be happy to read your comments with any feedback. But yeah, honestly, that's it for the video. I honestly don't have much to say, so we are at the end of the video. Like I said, if you want to leave any criticism for the game, well, comment section is open, and I'll see you guys in the next video, whenever that is. Goodbye.